When most people think of a fire department and firefighters, they think of firefighters rushing into burning buildings or fighting a raging forest fire. But the reality is much more nuanced than that. In fact, the majority of responses by the fire department have nothing to do with fires at all. So what is the actual role of a fire and rescue service? Well, in this episode, I'm talking to Stefan Myers, the Public Affairs Manager for Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. We'll be discussing the role of a fire and rescue service, some of TV Fire and Rescue's history, safety tips, a day in the life of a firefighter, and so many other fun topics. I learned so much from my conversation with Stefan, and if you've ever been interested in the inner workings of our local fire and rescue service, I think you will enjoy this episode as well. Hi, I'm Danielle Roberts. I'm a local realtor in Newberg. I'm a member of the Newberg Noon Rotary Club, an ambassador for our local Chamber of Commerce, a city club member, and I also have a separate YouTube channel about Newberg and real estate. But the main point is I love this town. I love helping people move here, and I really love sharing stories about all of the great organizations and people who make this town the great place that it is. And that's really what this podcast is all about, to share stories of hope and generosity with the goal of inspiring people, helping people get involved, and ultimately giving people hope for our future. So I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Stefan Myers as we discuss Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. Well, Stefan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you here. This is a episode I've been looking forward to for a while.
Yeah, glad to be here and be with you today.
So you're the Public Affairs Manager for TV Fire. And so the abbreviation, by the way, is TVF&R. Is it technically TVF&R?
There is.
Or is it?
Yeah, there's an ampersand.
Okay, there's an ampersand. Make sure to get that right. So what is your role at Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue?
Yeah, so I'm the Public Affairs Manager. And what that entails is we have 11 cities, 4 counties that we serve. So my team works to better connect our leadership with all of our city leaders, county leaders, and keep that connection. As a large fire district, we want to make sure we still have a very personal feel and connection. So we work to inform local leaders as well as raise their concerns with our leadership and be that connecting point.
Yeah, so I mean that's a pretty big. So 11 cities. That probably is a lot to list, but how big is that area? Like, kind of what's the range from where you guys cover?
Yeah, so some general touch points would be North Bethany above Beaverton and all the way up to Skyline Ridge there. We go as far east as Westland. And then we also cover Midway and that kind of Washington County area there, all the way through to North Plains. And now we serve down to Newberg at the south.
Okay, so is Newberg kind of the far, like, southwestern region?
Yeah, I mean, we have Wilsonville, but technically Newberg's a little bit farther south.
Yeah.
So you guys can win the title of most southern city with jurisdiction.
At least far southwestern.
Yeah.
Okay, and you actually grew up around firefighters, didn't you? So you're pretty familiar with the role. Did you ever actually want to be a firefighter?
It's a good question. So yeah, in my role, I came over as a communications professional. I also was in nonprofit for a while.
Okay.
But the reality is I grew up in the fire stations, and specifically at Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue when it was much smaller. I think probably when I was there as a kid, it was maybe 15 stations. So much smaller than the 29 stations and 11 cities now. But my father was a firefighter. He started Tualatin. He actually started with Washington County District 1 that then came together with Tualatin Rural to form what became Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue.
Okay.
So he actually was with one of the agencies, kind of like Newberg, that then came together with a larger agency. And he served as a firefighter and paramedic. He retired as a battalion chief. And so I was always at the station getting to know the crews, familiar with the work they did. And while it was something that really I had a lot of respect for, I was more interested in that nonprofit sector, right? And doing work in that area and working with people. I just love that. And eventually, though, as I was doing nonprofit, the opportunity came to do this role. And it is unique to TVF&R. Not every fire agency hires people from other backgrounds, professional backgrounds, to serve in these roles, because I also do our public information. So you might find me on TV doing radio interviews, or with newspapers as we have large-scale incidents. And my job is to make sure that people who are around the incident and the community know what's going on with that big brush fire up on the hill or a big car accident that happened in town.
So tell me a little bit about your nonprofit background. What did you do?
Yeah, so it started off at the University of Oregon doing public relations. I was in that field with journalist in the School of Journalism there. But I didn't really feel called to corporate life. I was more excited to use those skill sets with nonprofits. So I started with Habitat for Humanity for a little while. I worked for the city of Eugene doing their earned income tax credit program, but eventually wanted to go out to Central Oregon, where my father and my mom retired, and ended up in Sisters in Redmond for about 10 years working for the American Cancer Society. So I worked doing cancer patient services, promoting all the work that we did in the area, running some of our fundraising events like Relay for Lives. And I did that for a long time. And then I also even had a stint at the High Desert Museum, just passionate about ways to give back to the community. But like I said, then that transitioned when I had an opportunity to come back to the fire district that I grew up in, doing some similar work that fuels the soul and makes me feel glad about every day I get up to do this job.
Well, I think firefighters, most anyway, firefighters kind of have that like service in their blood, right? It's all about like helping people. So whether it's you're the actual ones on the front lines or the one, working the emergency equipment at an accident or whatever it might be, or working in the nonprofit sector, it's all about helping people and try to make people's lives better. So sounds like that runs in your blood too.
Yeah, I think you'll find when you walk into a fire station, there's people that are there that are passionate about what they do. They care about being really great, right? Whether it's paramedicine or the ability to pull somebody out of a vehicle or water rescue, they want to be the best at that because they're called to that service in somebody's worst day and worst moments, to be the technician and craftsperson that can help mitigate that scary situation.
But I think there's something really attractive about that, like just the idea of being the best you can be. And firefighters, one, there's always a stereotype of, physically they're always in good shape when they have to be, and sure, it's part of the job. But I think people see that, and I think young kids see that, like someone who's really good at what they do and they help people. I think I was mentioning before before we started recording, we used to live over by the fire station. I got a little 4-year-old and a 2-year-old daughter. And we'd go by there and they were always so friendly, and kids are always fascinated with the trucks, right? And they always want to see how the ladders work or watch them spring the hose or whatever. But they were always really nice and said hi and gave our kids some hats and stuff. So that's fun. But I know we've got a lot to cover. I'd love to talk a lot about a lot of these things. But yeah, we got a packed episode today. So you mentioned earlier when TVF&R was smaller and how they've kind of been expanding over the years. And one of the more recent, maybe the most recent expansion was into Newberg. Can you share a little bit about that transition from Newberg Fire Department being a part of or joining TVF&R?
Yeah. So if you don't mind me rewinding just a little bit, I'd love to give some perspective. Sure. Really this all stems from fire service is not a low cost proposition for any community to provide. So for a long time, fire departments have been looking to how can we consolidate services? Mm-hmm. How can we, maybe have one HR director, right? One fleet group and one fire chief that can oversee and give us the best economies of scale to provide the best levels of service to the community, but at a cost that we can afford. So that started as I was telling a story with my father, and those two entities, Tualatin Rural and Washington County Fire District 1, coming together and saying, hey, we are struggling. So we're going to come together and we're going to use these economies of scale to provide better service. Well, eventually that included Beaverton Fire. Eventually that included West Lynn Fire. And right now, you just saw on the ballot McMinnville, right? Looking at can the rural and the city come together to provide better service to their citizens? And these conversations are happening all over the state of Oregon. So it's consolidation to then leverage economies of scale to improve resources and emergency response. So with all that context, Newberg Fire was going through challenges they had a wonderful volunteer program. One of the top levels of, in fact, we were hiring some of the volunteers coming out of Newberg. They were just extremely proficient, well-trained, and excellent individuals. At the same time, those numbers are dropping. Volunteering for the fire service is very different today than it was back then.
How so?
Yeah, back then, for a long time, it was people had a little bit more time and availability. And what we find is the idea of pulling a 24-hour shift, leaving your family and sleeping over at the station isn't the same prospect it was before. People are busy, you have dual income homes, priorities are different. And so volunteer levels have been going down across the entire United States for at least the last 20 years. That's what Newberg was experiencing. At the same time, their call volume was dramatically going up and up year over year. So they were getting to the point that they would have to completely close down a station at night. They were getting to the point when they only had 2 people on a fire engine. And what it means when you arrive at a fire with 2 people is you can't go inside, even if you're ready to go interior, because you have to have 2 outside and 2 inside for safety of the firefighters. So they were in really challenging circumstances. So then their leadership and the city of Newberg approached Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue and said, hey, can we look at, consolidation? Can we look at annexation to come together with TVF&R to better provide service in our area? So there was a contract that was put in place temporarily. We like to joke that it's kind of dating phase, see if it's a good fit, right? We want to make sure that politically it makes sense. Financially, it makes sense. And operationally, most importantly, it makes sense. So we went through a 2-year period to feel that out and see if it was. And then, it did make a lot of sense. And that's when it went forth and was a vote of the people. And that's where so there was a Newberg rural fire district, and then there was also the city of Newberg. And both entities had to vote to decide to go into this through their elected leaders, but then as a vote of the people. And that was successful to a good tune. I can't remember the exact numbers, but they were really positive. But at the same time, especially as somebody who worked in community events and working with the public, it's not lost on us. That was a fire department that had a long history. When we entered into those conversations, 135 years of Newberg Fire.
Wow.
So they were really proud of who they were and what they had done. So we've really tried to honor both the events that they've done in the past, because they were really great at connecting with their community, whether it was going to the Old Fashioned Festival or whether it was the Toy and Joy program. These things were really important to Newberg Fire, and so they were important to us. It also manifests its way into, we have the engine, actually the 3rd fire engine ever in Newberg. The Dundee volunteers had it. We were able to work with our volunteer association and acquire it, and we were able to restore it. So now it goes in the parade and it goes down to the events, again, trying to honor that history and legacy of Newberg Fire.
So from 135 years ago, the 3rd engine they had. So how old is that engine?
It's pretty old. I can't remember the exact year on it. And then the Austin family actually has, I think it's number 4. So it's nice to know that some of that history is preserved, because that was another piece of Newberg Fire, is they really respected and honored all those that came before and everything that led to the fire department they were at that day.
One of the other things I love, you just talked about community involvement, is like at Christmas time, putting up helping put up the lights and stuff. So how does that work?
Yeah. So, there is a ton of events that we do, again, honoring that tradition. One of them is putting lights up around town. We work with the city of Newberg, so shout out to Public Works, because they are a big supporter with us, and our volunteers. So the Tualatin Valley Fire Volunteer Association gets really involved with this. And we go around town and put up all the lights and decorations, and then decorate the main tree down at the cultural center. We do that every year, and then also take them down in January. So that is just amongst at least, 7 different community events that I can think of off the top of my head that we do. Again, they come out of that tradition of the fire department being very involved with their community because it's about meeting the expectations. And this community here in Newberg really expects that the fire department is going to be involved and connected to what they do.
Yeah. Well, I think we all love it and appreciate the collaboration between TV Fire and Rescue and the city. Personally, I think it's a great match. And just from a logistics standpoint, seems to make a lot of sense. For example, when you think of a multiple alarm fire. So my understanding is that if there's one alarm or 2 alarm fire, that's how many stations are getting called out, or how does that work? But it seems like either way, when there's a lot of coordination needed from different stations, it makes it easier when it's one district.
Yeah. And so alarms that you're referring to is the amount of resources that are being sent, right?
Okay.
So if that can be for a car accident or a vehicle collision, it can be for a brush fire up on Chandler Mountain, or it could be for a residential fire. In each case, we have alarms, and that prescribes what amount of resources are sent. So on a first alarm fire, you're probably looking at about 6 engines and 2 trucks, as well as incident command that will be sent out to manage the scene because they can be very complex. The beautiful thing, though, about the fire service is we have a mutual aid system. So, for instance, I was just managing last night. We had a brush fire, and I was working on putting information about that. Gaston Fire sent some resources. Dundee Fire sent some resources because based on the alarm level, they were the closest and had the ability to send over brush units. So we often see where, we'll get pulled over to McMinnville to help. They recently had that downtown fire. I don't know if you remember that one, but it was at the theater. And we sent 2 units over there to help them. And that happens real quick through our mutual aid system.
Okay. So what does that mean? So what is that actually from specifically a 1 alarm, 2 alarm, 3, and how high does it go?
It can go up to, they just recently had a 4 alarm fire. Or actually, I think McMinnville's went to a 3 alarm. But yeah, basically, if it's a 4 alarm, you're looking at, a lot of nearly 100 firefighters on the scene. And that's a complex, long-running incident. But, it just speaks to the scale and how many resources are required to mitigate that incident.
Okay, so it's not necessarily if this number of firefighters, it's this alarm. If this many are needed, it's this alarm. Is it more arbitrary than that?
No, it's pretty prescribed in each one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so on a second alarm, that's going to be double what a first alarm would be in resources. And I think just getting back to the other point I was sharing with you is resources were stretched thin. Mm-hmm. So when one incident, even just a small fire would happen in Newberg, now they were having to pull from McMinnville and our district to cover medical incidents. And now we have the depth to be able to shift resources. So what's amazing about being a large district as we are is we're able to shift resources around when we have a lot of calls.
Yeah.
So for instance, let's say DCI fire. I don't know if you remember that one, but that pulled a lot of resources. I think that went to a second alarm. I don't think it went to a third. So in that case, though, it's a lot of resources on scene, right? You're probably talking about at least 10 apparatus, probably 60 to 80 firefighters. That's a lot of our resources for the entire district. So that means now parts of Beaverton are shifting down to Tigard. Parts of Tigard are shifting down to Sherwood and King City. And Sherwood resources and Tualatin resources are shifting down to Newberg to make sure that even while the DCI fire is happening, if you have a medical event, if a family member is in cardiac distress, then we still have the resources nearby to respond and help. And that's where being a large district means we don't empty out the system and don't have anything. It means we can shift and we can move things to try and cover a high volume or a peak volume of calls.
Yeah, that makes it probably logistics are much easier to deal with.
Yeah, when you're under one umbrella, we all have the same training, understanding. They can shift down to one of our stations. That isn't to discount that we have a lot of partners. Like Oswego sometimes comes over to fires for us, and Dundee comes up, and Yamhill and McMinnville. But it certainly is nice when, as a whole district, we can shift and coordinate between multiple cities to ensure the best possible coverage and care for our citizens.
Yeah. So one of the other things in Newberg, there's now 2 stations. And when did this second station get built?
Yeah, so that was prior to us being here.
Okay.
That would be Station 21 on Springbrook, and that's where the truck is housed. So they have an aerial apparatus that they can use. It also comes with heavy extrication material or tools, which is really important if you see a nasty. So if you're up on the hill here, as you're headed up, or by Rex Hill, we see a lot of car accidents that happen in that area. They're able to bring the tools and resources there to help get a patient out of a car if they're pinned in. But then if you go downtown to Station 20, that's where you have the water rescue team, because we have this beautiful body of water that runs close to town here in the Willamette. So they're able to respond to there and down to Yamhill River and other areas when we have people that are in distress on the water. They're frequently down at Rogers Landing and doing work to try and make sure the waterways are safe as well.
And that was one of my other questions. So each station kind of serve its own purpose and kind of strategically located on opposite ends of the town, but also to do, what its location kind of requires more. So do you know when that station was built?
I can't remember off the top of my head when it was built. Yeah, it was prior to us.
Okay. I can't remember that timeline either. But I just remember it being a little bit newer.
Yeah, it might be helpful to also be aware of. So as a part of that transition, there was a rural fire protection district. They had some funds, not quite enough to build a new station, but some funds they had set aside. So we work with them to keep those funds there. And we're actually in the process of trying to find a rural property that would serve some of the area out towards, where am I thinking? Out towards the air park. Cheyenne Air Park area. We were looking at one specific property, but it didn't serve our purposes for running a fire station. We're actually looking for a way that we could use those funds from the rural station to site out there, so we could have quicker response into some of our rural areas, and they could also respond back into town when we have a large incident. So stay tuned. We're just looking for the right property that is the good fit for us.
Okay. One of the other things we had talked about earlier is there's firefighters, and just that kind of whole emergency response kind of has the fascination of many young boys and girls. Many, I think, even actually, no, I always wanted to be a police officer when I was younger. Not a police officer now, but a lot of kids say they want to be a firefighter when they grow up.
Yeah.
You grew up in the family, you ended up having a different route, but the industry well, if you can call it an industry. But what advice would you give to young kids who want to, or parents who have young kids who want to be a firefighter?
Yeah. So the first thing we recommend for anybody that's interested is looking to get your EMT, emergency medical technician. The reality is we're talking about a lot of fires and things, but 7 out of 10 calls for us are medical in nature. So as our population and demographics have aged, the calls that we're seeing are, strokes, their falls, their cardiac or heart issues. We're seeing a lot more medical needs within our community. So getting your EMT can help prepare you in having the skill set as a firefighter that you're going to be using quite often. Secondly is getting experience. And so just start with reaching out to your local fire department and asking if you can stop by the station, talk with another firefighter about their experience and career to make sure it's the right fit for you. Maybe see if you can schedule a ride along to ride along for a couple hours. And then there's volunteering, there's internship programs and opportunities for you to get your hands-on experience and see if it's the right career path for you.
And I think that's a really great idea. I mean, obviously it's a great idea, but just because I think, like you said, 7 out of 10 calls are medical, right? So if in the storybooks and everything, it's always this big fire, you're climbing up the ladder, it seems really grand and exciting, but the reality is that's probably a small minority of what a firefighter actually does. So I guess, what would you say the normal day looks like in a firefighter's life, or at least on a shift?
Yeah. So firefighters within Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue work a 24-hour shift, and then they're off for 48 hours. So one day, off for 2 days. That shift starts at 7 a.m. So 7 a.m. is going to be that shift change. So there's a transition of a crew coming off and a crew coming on. And the other part is the reality is they know these crews that they work with pretty darn well because they spend a third of their life in the station doing just that work. So they're on for a 24-hour shift. Once they start their day, that's usually going to be acclimation and briefing. So finding out what the plan is for the day, maybe what are wind conditions, what are weather patterns that are going on, what are some potential calls they might see. Maybe it's really hot, so hey, let's be checking our kits and making sure we're prepared for any heat emergencies. Depending on the day of the week, it also might include rig checks. Making sure all the apparatus are working well. I think we can relate that our cars need to be working for us to get to work every day. If our cars don't work, or our large cars, the engines, we can't get the calls. So those are kept in tip-top shape by our apparatus operators. So they're constantly checking those to make sure that they're in good condition. And then we have some other rigs that we can switch out if there is an issue. Then they're usually going to roll into either working out, because they want to stay in good shape. Whether it's a medical call or it's a fire, you're going from 0 to 60 sometimes in the middle of the night. Mm-hmm. And that can put a lot of stress on your heart and your cardiovascular system. So we know that we can really help take care of firefighters' health by working out, making good choices, and eating healthy. All the things that we're supposed to do, right? But their lives are on the line, and statistically, we know that can impact them in cardiac events. So they take that really seriously in trying to remain healthy. Then it might roll into training. What are some things that we need to be training and working on our skill sets on? So that could be medical, it could be fire, it could be search, it could be if they have a specialty team they're on, like water rescue, and include those things. Then it might roll into getting ready for lunch. The thing in the fire service is love to eat good food. We've got some amazing cooks, and it is a quick and easy way to win over friends at the fire station if you can cook. And so they actually pay for their own meals when they're on duty, and each station works that out and having funds to help pay for their daily food. So they go out shopping, which is why you see them out there spending their own money, and then they get back and make their meal for the day. And by that time, they're probably running calls and have been busy. And then that rolls into the afternoon where it starts to pick up. We know statistically that's when calls start to rise. And so, that rolls into emergency response for most of the rest of the day.
Yeah, I'm sure it's important for them to be staying in good shape and keeping themselves alert and everything on those 48-hour off shifts too.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one thing we take for granted is firefighters have to be getting up in the middle of the night for calls, right? So it can really throw off sleep patterns, and that can be a really challenge for health. So we try to really take it seriously and getting rest, taking care of our crews, especially on some of these hot days that we're going to see this summer.
Yeah, especially next week. I guess by the time this is filmed or released, next week's it'll be a hot week.
Yep.
We don't handle the 90s very well here in Newberg.
No. Well, and as we heat up right off the bat, our bodies acclimate. So we see a huge uptick in calls on these first bursts of heat, because it just takes at least 3 days for the body to acclimate to heat.
Okay. I know this is maybe kind of a loaded question, but this podcast is about Newberg and what's special about Newberg. Do you think there's anything special about the Newberg team? I know it's TVF&R is kind of its own unit, but Newberg is also kind of its own team too. Do you notice anything special about the guys here in Newberg and gals?
So it was interesting because during the transition, a lot of the Newberg firefighters stayed and worked within Newberg, right? And then as they've gotten opportunities to go be on our technical rescue team or our hazardous materials team or do other things within the district, they've moved around. But what you'll find is actually our downtown station, a lot of those individuals actually are Newberg firefighters that are here, and they really care about their community. Fun one they were just doing was, I think they were at Chehalem Valley Middle School, doing the mud run out there. And we've done that for a long time previous. And they love getting out there to connect with the community and fill a big mud pit and help the kids have a great day. So you'll just find that, it shouldn't be a surprise, but it's still wonderful to see that they care about their community in such small ways and want to be out there and connecting with them as much as possible. I think you also find here we have at least 3 medic units. So what's special in Newberg is they run a lot of medical calls. We're in charge of transporting individuals from an emergency to hospitals. In other counties, there's a private provider, but Yamhill County has a fire department-centric system. So we have some amazing paramedics here that it's like bringing the emergency room to your living room when they respond. Now, obviously, doctors and nurses have a tremendous amount of skill, and the hospital environment has a lot more than we can do. But what they can bring to your living room on a cardiac arrest call or a stroke call to help your loved ones is incredible, and they take that really seriously. You'll go in there and they're sitting with our medical director, breaking down calls to try and be the best they can at saving lives. And actually, we just recently had a statistic that if you have a cardiac arrest within our jurisdiction, your chance of survival is around 42%. So we're nearing about a 50-50 chance of survival. That's huge because nationally, it's closer to like 15%.
Oh, wow.
So that makes a huge difference for feeling safe in our communities. And it's a testament to just how proficient but yet professional our crews are and wanting to be really great at responding to calls that are life-threatening like that.
Yeah. Now, this is something you may not be able to provide too much commentary on it or not, but I know in the somewhat recent past, you've had personnel issues. There's I think at least one individual who got into some trouble, was not doing some great things, and kind of put a cloud in some ways over the district. And it was one out of many, that kind of happens sometimes. I'm sure that was a really difficult thing to go through as a station. Can you comment at all about kind of the response to that internally and how you've because trust is so important in a community, right? Mm-hmm. So I know that was probably a really difficult thing to deal with. I don't know if you're able to comment on that at all.
Yeah. So I think what I would say is that with, spending a third of your life with your crew, it is like a fire family. And not everybody's going to get along and have the same views as each other. And we are also very people-centric. It's not about the big red trucks. It's about the people that are in it. So we take it very seriously in making sure that the individuals of our group reflect the expectations of our community. They're in a very important position within our communities in which you have to trust them with your lives. And so we do take those seriously whenever there's a situation that comes up. But it also then hits internally as people are close, and you want the best for people, even if you don't always agree with everything they do. So similar to families, it's about still having a common bond of what's important and we're focused on. But yeah, those situations can be challenging.
Yeah. And I know I hadn't even thought about that until now as you're sharing just how special the team is here. I just know it's, I'm sure it is like a family, and tough when you see family members that make poor choices. But, I've always appreciated, like I said, how, everyone I've ever come into contact at the district has always been extremely friendly and helpful, and I think has a really good heart, which is just important for the community to know that despite what an individual might do, it does not reflect on the overall brand, so to speak.
Sure.
So you mentioned that a lot of incidents are medical versus a big fire or things like that. Do you find that a lot of incidents are like preventable? Like you kind of wish the population knew like a few things, like gosh, like we always see these same things, and it's very preventable if a couple preventative measures were taken.
Sure. A couple things to be aware of is most fires, or a large amount of fires, are cooking fires that we see. And so that can be both making good choices in staying attended to your cooking. So a lot of times somebody walks away from the pot, all of a sudden fire gets out of control.
Well, they say watch pot never boils, right?
Yeah. Well, in this case, we still want you to watch the pot boil, because we're telling you it'll get there. But the reality is, I mean, that's where a lot of fires start, in the home. And so making sure you're attending to your cooking, and then also having a fire extinguisher in the home can make sure that it's safe. And finally, knowing to put a lid on the fire takeaway oxygen is actually the most effective means. You see a lot of times people try to throw water in it. That then just sprays everything everywhere and makes it worse. So knowing what to do and just remember to put a lid on it can really help with fires in the home.
One thing I'll quickly add, this is from my engineering background, is in my past life. Well, I say you can take a man out of an engineering, but you can't take engineering out of a man. Water expands by, I think, over 400 times, right? When you throw water on an oil fire, that basically instantly turns into steam, which is then, he said, spreads the fire. So it's typically not the best.
What if it's a grease fire, right? Then now all the grease is moved and now we're in the cabinets.
Yeah.
Which is what we typically see. Yeah.
But anyway, so continue. So cooking fires is one.
Yeah. And then other ones we see too are, so some of our older adults in communities, and making sure two things that can really help is trip hazards in the home. We see a lot of maybe our senior population that can take falls. So making sure that we've gotten rid of trip hazards. And the second one maybe isn't preventable, but it's certainly helpful to our fire crews, is having your medical information easily available. So at any fire station right now with Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, you can find a medical information card that you could just put on the refrigerator or have in the drawer ready to go. So that if there's medications, if there's things that the firefighters need to be aware of, they can help in providing care right away and doing it appropriate to what your medical history is. Also, if you have an older individual that has a DNR or a do not resuscitate, that can also be really important to us. And especially with the care homes that we see, and we have quite a few here in Newberg, those are ways that we can be really well informed when responding to those areas. So if you have a loved one that is in one of the care facilities, making sure that they don't have any trip hazards, their information's well available, could really help fire crews.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a challenge, especially when you're responding to a scene and someone needs help and you don't know exactly what. If you don't have that information, I'm sure that could be a challenge if there's allergies to medications or things like that. I'm sure that'd be really tricky.
Yeah, and if the person isn't able to articulate that, right? If they're either nonverbal or not cognitive, then they might not be able to convey the important medical information that we need. So having it put together beforehand, that preparation, can make a huge difference in what medications they know to give and what kind of course of treatment they will pursue based on that history. So it just can give our paramedics a running head start to better take care of your family.
Now, what about Rex Hill? I know you mentioned there's a lot of accidents that happen up there. Is it usually like the same intersections, or is it just like, what is it about Rex Hill? I always hear about accidents up there.
Yeah, there's just a couple issues or areas where there's a tough line of sight with some of the roads that enter in there. It also just has a tendency to get pretty icy. So whenever we have some events where there's just maybe a little bit of frost or ice, that usually gets hit pretty quickly. And then also on the rain side. So if it hasn't rained in a while and we get a good downpour, that puts a lot of the oils and things that come off our cars onto the road, so people can lose control. So yeah, we've seen, and with the way it's set up, if you lose control, you're probably going to go head on, or it's going to be a high impact situation, which obviously is going to require a lot of response from firefighters and our paramedics.
Yeah. Is there anything that you wish more people knew about the fire and rescue service, or like common misconceptions that people might have?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to hit it again, but I think people don't realize just how much medical we respond to, like how much work we do in that field. And so I just always try to espouse that we have some amazing medical professionals in emergency medicine that are doing great work, and they train really hard to make sure that if you or a family member having a medical emergency, that they're well prepared for that. Yeah, I think that's the main one is, and we've even done surveys of our community, and the awareness that we do emergency medical work is near like 60%.
Oh,
So there's a real lack of awareness because everybody thinks of the movies, right? Like, oh, Backdraft and Chicago Fire are my references, and I don't realize that actually a lot of times it's going into somebody's home who's having trouble breathing, who's maybe having a stroke, who has fallen and maybe had an impact injury.
yeah. Well, yeah, and it reminds me too of, wait, so you're saying 60%, only 60% of people know that you do emergency medical at all?
Correct.
Oh, wow. So if you, I'm sure if you did a survey then of how much was medical, there'd probably be even less. Yeah. I don't know if I would have guessed. I would have guessed that a small portion was fire response. The other reminds me, actually, last summer, speaking of misconceptions and people not doing smart things, we live over in the River Run neighborhood, and right there by Ewing Young, there have been people starting fires there. I don't know if you have heard anything about that, but yeah, like I saw a smoldering fire in the forest. It might have been people who, were sleeping there overnight or whatever. So it was on like a Saturday or Sunday. So I called the Chehalis Parks and Rec district, and no one was there. So I called fire department. They came in. It was, I think, like 140 degrees is what they measured it at, which is, I think, below flash point, but still made me nervous because it's right by my house. But yeah, that's just kind of, it's interesting. Yeah. What?
Well, if you get some wind, that can turn into something. And I think that actually for fire prevention, that's worth noting is burn piles. Right. So if you live in maybe a rural area where it is allowed to be burning and you're in that window, people keeping those piles small and manageable makes a huge difference. A lot of the brush fires we respond to during the summer, you'll see burn pile got away.
Yeah.
Debris pile got away. Or maybe somebody was trying to burn weeds and got away from them. So being very aware of the conditions. Also, if we are in a burn ban, understanding that behavior is especially admonished during that time. And then also, if you are going to burn, which a lot of people do in rural areas, that you're keeping them small, manageable, and you're just like cooking, you're attending. You're aware of it, and you have water and resources to extinguish the fire. That can prevent a lot of the brush fires that you see us running out of town to go stop.
Yeah, and please don't have your burn pile in the middle of a forest.
Also, I do.
So on the last question here, I know we're kind of getting towards the end of this. On the day this podcast is aired, you're going to be speaking at City Club, which unfortunately right now they don't do any kind of recording or anything like that. So we don't have time for the whole presentation, but what are kind of some general insights that you'll be giving there about Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue that maybe you could share here for this audience?
Yeah, so a couple things we're going to hit. First one's updates on our district, but specific to recruiting. So recruiting numbers are down. I was talking about the trend of volunteering going down, but we're really seeing also the amount of people that are applying to be a firefighter, applying to be a paramedic. Those numbers are drastically down. They used to be in the thousands a decade ago, and now we're in the hundreds. Luckily, TVF&R is in a pretty good position as we are a destination department. People from all over the state and from nearby states want to come work for us because they're excited about some of the innovative ways we respond and resources that we provide to our crews. But those numbers are drastically down. So at the same time, a lot of the people that were hired were back in the 90s. So they'd come of retirement age. And a lot of our crews are now, or firefighters are now retiring. So we're having this massive turnover. And that means that we're having recruit academies of like 24 firefighters, which we would call a mega academy. And that's pretty large. So we have this challenge of recruit numbers are down. We need to run bigger academies to fill positions that are coming available. And this isn't just us. This is fire districts a lot around the area. But that means that we've had to get a little more innovative with our social media, our outreach, and trying to let people know about, what the fire service is and what a firefighting career could look like. And we're just trying to get that word out for people that are interested, that want to maybe go get that EMT, learn a little bit more about it, and, maybe do a volunteering or internship to learn more. Then from there, we're going to talk a little bit about preparedness for this upcoming fire season. So using the ready, set, go principles, we're going to talk about home hardening, especially if you live out in some of the rural areas, making sure gutters are clean, you've limbed up trees, and that way if a brush fire was to come your way, there's a lower risk of it actually impacting or damaging your home. So we want people to be aware of that, in addition to having a go bag, being aware of alerts and information that might come out. I mean, in 2020, we had the Chehalem Valley or Chehalem Mountain Bald Peak fire. It was huge, and it was the largest wildfire we've had within our district. It ended up being about 700, 800 acres. And that was a testament to people home hardening. And we didn't lose any homes.
Wow.
So the work of our firefighters in stopping the fire in critical areas. And then secondly, people knowing when to evacuate and being aware of how to get out of their community. One of our mutual friends we were talking about, Linda Sandberg, was obviously first an advocate, and people being aware of that, and then also integral in getting information out as we're going through that process. But knowing all of those steps is what we want to impart, and that's will be part of our presentation.
And the ready, set, go basically just means if a fire's close-ish, you should be ready. If it's a little bit closer, then you need to be set, have all your things ready, and then there's a certain point where it's just time to get out, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember dealing with that. We were almost close. I think we were in the just ready phase, where our house wasn't, in danger at the time. Still very, very scary.
It is.
Yeah.
And ready, what we impart, and this is a statewide program, ready is also that preventative stuff. You're asking about prevention, opportunities. And that's where the home hardening and, moving your firewood pile away from your home, all these things you can do in advance will better prepare you for the situation that might occur.
Yeah. And then on the note of recruitment, you mentioned earlier in one of our other discussions about diversity and how you're trying to get a more diverse population, because it's historically been white males. Yeah. So what are some of the efforts you're doing to have some more diversity in your recruitment?
Yeah. So a couple things that we've been doing is, first, we have partnered with Portland Fire in running a Portland Metro Fire Camp. And it's for girls 18, I think it's to 24 is the age group. And they come in, and usually about 30 to 40 young women. And we only have our female firefighters as instructors. And they get a multi-day experience of rappelling off of buildings, running fire engines, pulling hose, doing emergency medical, and getting experience to build confidence and awareness of their capabilities and exposure to the job, but also inspire them that this career is a possibility for them. And so we know that's been a really impactful program in trying to balance out gender equity within the fire service. We also then, on the other side, have really tried to reach out more to our non-English speaking communities, and also our firefighters of color have taken it really upon themselves and done the great work of reaching out and being a part of our outreach effort, so that young individuals that identify with them can see themselves as potential firefighters. We often, by seeing, oh, look, somebody that looks like me is out there doing that work, now opens up that door that could be a possibility. So we really are trying to make sure that we're available, but also doing that proactive outreach to represent the communities that we serve.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did we already talk about the community activities and different classes that you have? I don't know if we talked about that yet, specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you about some of the community events that we have. Yeah. So, we were talking a little bit about, we have an open house, and we try to do those regularly, where the community is welcome to come in and come down to the station. This year, we're going to be at Station 20 downtown. We want people to come in and see the apparatus, see what a station looks like, meet some of the firefighters. Police is already going to be there as well, and I think they're going to bring the K9 unit, so police and fire do get along sometimes. And we just enjoy inviting the community to be a part of that. We go to the Old Fashioned Festival, and we have all of our antique apparatus come out there, and they actually come from all around the region. And so on Sunday, they gather around at the field, there. I'm trying to remember the field off Blaine there.
It's over by the Ewing Young Elementary School. I don't know the name of the field.
I know it's eluding me, but we go and park around the track there. And so you can come out and see some of the antique apparatus. The kids love running around and checking it out. And we usually do our junior firefighter challenge course out there as well. We do a golf scramble. That's for our Toy Enjoy program. So it's how we raise some of our funds. So if you're a golfer and you want to come support kids getting toys and during the holidays, we have that event going on. And then Toy Enjoy itself is a great program. People can donate new toys down to us, as a part of us making sure that toys go out to kids throughout the area. And last year we served, I think it was roughly about 220 or 230 families here in Newberg in delivering or providing them toys to make sure kids had toys under the Christmas tree.
Come on.
And that was a program that was started back in 1929 by a firefighter who actually just used to fix old toys for kids in his garage. And then it kept evolving into now us, delivering boxes of toys to families.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
The other two are we do an Easter egg hunt every year at Jaquith Park, and then a pancake breakfast. It's been on hold for a couple of years with COVID, but next year we're hoping to, in 2024, we usually do that in May, and we'd be looking forward to doing that again because we love bringing people into the station and getting to have, break bread and have some fellowship with our community.
Yeah. So last question then. Obviously you are, I think you have a lot of respect around here. You're kind of one of the main people, the main public figures when people think of the fire department, which is why Linda connected us. Thank you, Linda. And so you've gotten to see a lot of Newberg as you have the other cities you work in, but specifically for Newberg, given the time that you've been involved with this city, what would you say gives you hope for the future?
Newberg is a very special community. As I live actually just up the hill, full disclosure, I'm in Sherwood. And so as we'll
still love you.
As we're going through that process, right, that transition and annexation, I really got to know the community and found a real philanthropic spirit that I super appreciated. So whether it was going to chamber or leadership, Newberg, now Sham Valley, or getting to know some of the Newberg firefighters, the Newberg fire retirees, there was such a sense of service and purpose, and seeing the amount of people that want to give back in some way. And they all do in different ways. But it was so heartening to see the amount of, especially young people, that I'd really see wanting to get involved with their community and give back. And that felt like a real special thing. Also, food. I said fire service were into food, but I love the food and everything restaurant and places that you have we have in Newberg. It's, yeah.
Well, thank you. No, I've always...
Philanthropic and food. Sorry, the two things that go together, right?
Maybe I should say the giving town and I don't know how to tie food into that, but... Well, no, thank you for your time today, Stefan. It's been great getting to talk to you and learn more about the, TVF&R. I always got to get those names right. TVF&R.
You got it down.
It's been great to learn more about it, and I appreciate all that you do. I appreciate all the firefighters and EMT workers do. Obviously, we could not function very well as a town without you all. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
happy to be here.
Thank you for tuning in to the Giving Town podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. While more and more people are continuing to hear about this podcast, I still need your help to spread the message about all the people and organizations that make Newberg so great. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.